Valentine, for the people of God, and especially the people called Methodists, united. The community connected with this letter, 1 John, is a community that has experienced schism. Once united, the community is now divided. And the letter is sent to those who are left. The reasons are difficult to discern over the centuries. Perhaps there were struggles over economics or geopolitics in the empire, or maybe styles of worship or leadership. The only clue that remains, and it's a faint one, is doctrinal. It was a theological dispute over the humanity of Jesus. It was a Christological crisis that led to a schism. Those who confess Jesus as truly human and truly holy, they are the ones who are left, and they are the ones this letter that you heard read seeks to console and strengthen. So, how did it happen? Did they take a vote? Or did they vote with their feet? Did they hurl insults or cheers? Did they change the locks or change their hearts? Did they dance in the aisles or weep as their hearts were breaking? We do not know, but perhaps everyone was asking the same question: where do we go from here? Randall Miller, a leader in the Methodist for Social Action, writes this. He puts the question this way: chaos or community? He writes, having been to every general conference as either a witness or a delegate for the past 30 years, I know there will come a point when I'm so entangled in legislative strategies and the dreary transnationalism that passes for Christian conferences, when I will no longer be able to see the stars, i.e., the higher purposes, the guiding principles that brought me to St. Louis in the first place. But I will still know what they are: the liberation of the LGBTQ people and home. Those are his stars. So how do we find home when the maps are missing? Or there are competing versions? How do we keep our balance when the ground is shaking? When we need to stand fast, but the foundations themselves are fracturing? I told this story once long ago. Some of you are old enough perhaps to remember it. I do not tell it often. It is a hard story to tell. But today's the day. So it was my first church, my first Sunday. I'm their first woman associate pastor, and they're taking that very hard. The senior pastor, in fact, is away on his first vacation in 3 years. In addition to all the other unfamiliar firsts, I'm 8 months pregnant. That's a first. And to complicate matters, Bill, my beloved Bill, has had to leave me there in West by God, Virginia, while he takes his oral exams at Duke. There was no GDR mercy in that place. So I'm the only resident in a small parsonage in the shadow of this big first church, and it's filled with our boxes, minus air conditioning, but it is well carpeted with fleas. It's Sunday, and the knock on the door is a surprise. I'm ready to head to the sanctuary. And standing on the stoop is a stranger. He's old, he's very tall, and he's definitely a pastor. Who else wears a black suit and a tie in 92-degree weather? So he introduces himself, Rosslinger. He's retired. He will be my assistant for the service. Old-fashioned, I think, and he offers me his arm as I'm getting ready to go down the stairs. But since there isn't a guardrail, I'm grateful. I am always grateful for the kindness of strangers. As I watch him lead the congregation through those prayers, I know he'd been their pastor at some time in the past. You know, there's a kind of familiar call and response between pastor people when they're loved. It shows. After the service is over, he takes his place beside me at the door for that very curious Methodist ritual called the right hand of fellowship, or how do you get out of the church without longer conversations with the pastor. And he didn't use a rod, but he certainly guided that flock to meet me. But I assume he noticed, as I noticed, there were more than a few who took another exit to greener pastures, or pastors. Now, his pastoral ministry had been there. I knew that. And when the sanctuary finally empties, he lingers. He wants me to know why he is still there. He needed me to know why, at the end of a very long and successful ministry, he is still here. Sitting every Sunday, he told me, in the same row where the light from the stained glass window would make rainbows on the pew. His pastoral ministry at First Church spanned the years leading up to, during, and following World War II. He'd prayed with the young men who volunteered and departed, and then month after month, year after year, he prayed with those families as that costly sacrifice went on. His own family was at the heart of those prayers, because he had performed the wedding for his oldest daughter and this handsome pilot who had given her heart wings. He had performed the wedding in that sanctuary. And then, after that young pilot was deployed for places unknown, the daughter came back with a brand new life named Lucy, his first granddaughter. And so they spent those years waiting in the war together. But he said, Lucy was this irresistible source of energy and joy, and she'd find his office, and she'd get down, and she'd call through the crack under the door, "Poppy, Poppy, play." And he said, I didn't finish many sermons in those days. So, the war finally came to an end. It was joy unspeakable when the news of peace came. And there were, he said, shouts of hallelujah and even dancing in the aisles in this very staid, very proper First Church when they got that news. It was such good news. War, then peace. And some servicemen were going to be asked to carry out that work of making peace after war by helping clean out some of the toxic wreckage of war. And his son-in-law was going to be one of those kinds of peacemakers. So Roz said, when we got the word that the families could come, I got ready to drive my daughter and Lucy to New York. But before he said I did that, I took her up and he pointed up at the window that he had been looking at. And it was a beautiful stained glass window of Jesus holding the children. So he said, I took Lucy up there. She's all of a big, almost 2. And I explained to her that I was now going to let Jesus hold on to her until she could come back again. And then even after that, he would hold on to her. And he said, I was explaining this, holding her up, and she reached out and she touched that beautiful, that human face of God and said, ah. There was a long silence after this. It was too long. I didn't want to hear the rest of this story. One month, one very short month, after he had delivered them safely to New York City and driven back, in the same place where he had done a wedding, there were 3 coffins, his son-in-laws, his daughters, and Lucy. They had gone up in a small plane to see what war and peace looked like from high up. And the plane fell like some wounded bird. They didn't know why. They never knew why. I remember sitting down when he said that. And it took all the strength I had to finally break the silence. And I said, how is that possible? I'm sitting there at the start of a new life, at the start of the new ministry, at the start of God knows what might happen. And I asked the only thing that made any sense to me, how is it possible to survive? He answered me, but he never took his eyes off the face of Jesus. Here's what he said. His grace is sufficient. Sufficient. That sound of our child in our midst makes this a hard story. Sufficient. It was a long, quiet walk back to the parsonage. And we're there, almost, when he suddenly says, you know, once I was a delegate to General Conference. And it was that was so trivial given what I made some sort of probably complimentary sound. It made no sense to me what he just said. And then he said, it was 1956. 1956. That is when the Methodist Church, with a very narrow vote, voted to ordain women, make them full members. So I stop, I drop his arm, I look him full in the face and say, "How did you vote, Roz?" And he smiled at me and took my arm again and said, "I voted then the way I vote now. I vote for you." This is the heart of our tradition, traditio. This is how the people called Methodist United hand on the creed of love. This is how it is done. Have you been called to the work of ministry by Christ? Have you been called to the work of ministry by Christ? Yes. I vote for you. Have you evidence of fruits of the Spirit? Yes. I vote for you. Are you willing to be perfected in love in this lifetime? Yes. I vote for you. This is the grace that is sufficient. And as the writer of that long ago letter reminds us, that which was from the beginning, which we have heard and seen with our eyes, and have looked at and touched with our hands, the Word, who is life. This is the subject of all our preaching, all our study, all our letters, all our conferencing. All our conferencing. And I tell you this, to fulfill your joy.